Okay. Mike Bullard. Oh, wait. Here we go.
Okay.
Green Valleys Association, Mike Bullard, take it away.
Try and do this in 6 minutes. I know we're running behind schedule. This is the very small second order tributary right above SL 113. It's draining 1,500 acres of essentially newly preserved land. It was an agricultural operation for many decades, and it was hanging on the edge of being developed. 800 homes upstream of this did not. There's 38 homes going in, but this trib and the other second order trib where SL 114 is on is still showing a lot of stormwater impacts. This is probably the worst thing in the year. Background, let's see if we can get this to work. I'm going to turn around actually. Some background on the Pickering, which is where we're at. We go back to 1937 and look at some of this. Pickering basically looked like the moon, all intensive agriculture, riparian corridors, horrible shape. That one actually looks better than usual, but simply very poor riparian corridors, wall-to-wall intensive agriculture. And as we've moved ahead 80 years, there's been a lot of return of forest. Not so much in the Pickering, but we're seeing this in other watersheds pretty intensively. And especially improving the condition along the riparian corridors so that these things have some protection at this point. It's not great. The other trend we're seeing, and the intensive agriculture has dropped away. The other trend we're seeing, this is Route 76, that is Route 100, and the development that's occurred along the Route 100 corridors is crazy. In aggregate, this is definitely harming this HQ stream. Unfortunately, when they do building permits, they don't look at the aggregate. It's just each permit is apparently okay. So that's the background. So we've got multiple trends going on. And how do I get out of this? No. I'm going to just actually try and find a thing. Okay, there we go. So just a slide showing that not only has that agriculture come off, since the 1930s, the NRCS, the intensity of sediment generation per acre has dropped significantly. So that's another thing that we're a trend in the watershed. So we have forest lands increasing, improvements in riparian buffer cover, biomass is increasing as these forests get older, and agriculture is coming off. But we're left with 200 years worth of sediments that have been generated and dropped into the Pickering. And you saw how intensive that agriculture was, probably just that intensive 150 years ago. Most of the Pickering was settled in the mid-1700s. We look at a biological condition gradient. The Pickering has moved from the lower area up somewhat, and this is a generalization for the whole watershed. We're fortunate enough to have, along with Stroud, Chester County Water Resources Authority / USGS, which has been collecting huge amounts of data in the county since 1970. We can look at their macroinvertebrate data, and on the left, that's essentially a dead creek. It gets up to about HQ quality, lower end of HQ. And this is just one site. There are multiple sites in the Pickering, and there's other data, and has pretty much stalled. So again, we have multiple trends are driving improvements in macroinvertebrates and then stalling. I found this. This is actually from a Stroud publication. It's the same data, and it's been processed almost exactly the same. So I feel good. This is actually data we had. You can't go back. There's no way to go back. Hold on. This is data that we had interns from Westchester process in 2013. Pickering, aqua color there. So as we're looking at, we're trying to decide what experimental design, what we need to be looking at in this watershed in terms of the stressors, the number one thing, the number one primary cause is the stormwater flows, followed by the amount of sediment that's being generated. We used to think that sediment was coming off the land. Studies in nearby watersheds, Conestoga watershed, and actually in the Susquehanna is showing that it could be as much as 70% of the sediment is coming from bank material. And it's these banks that have built up very recently, post-European settlement.
Legacy sediment.
Yes, be careful with that word. So, Steve, is that? There we go. Flow is something we have a pretty good handle on. This is, I was looking for something to calibrate. I have a flow model that I was pretty much done with 3 years ago. I was looking for something to calibrate in the Pickering. What I found is there used to be a gauge right above Montgomery School. So I found a weather data set that went back far enough, fed it to the model. This looks pretty good. If you're looking at, so one of those is simulated, one of those is observed, and this is pretty much right in the watershed. And the important parts, the base flow looks pretty good, and that's the part that's pretty hard to get. There's a lot of noise in this because working with a single weather station in Phoenixville, so very non-ideal conditions. These are the locations. We have 4 mayflies. The model itself has 303 outlets. And so we have actually 1% of those outlets are instrumented, which is pretty cool. And there's the location of that gauge that went away 36 years ago. We will be validating this model against the mayfly delivery stuff. We also have, I'm working on an hourly model. This is actually running, so the blue is underneath the, you can't read the legend, but blue is simulated. The other one is observed. I mean, it's, yes, and I made a rating curve up to translate this. It's not the rating curve that you guys are generating, but it'll be pretty close. And in fact, this is this is that sensor, SL114. It's way up. It's a second order tributary, so it's a really small stream. I mean, you can step across it in places, but don't have a rating curve for this yet. But the upper blue is the daily average of the CTD depth. The red one is simulated flow coming out of the model, which is, there's a timing issue.
Correlation with SWOT.
Pardon?
SWOT did a pretty good job.
It's sort of amazing what it does.
Yeah.
You can see the timing issue. Some of this weather data is UTC -12.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating what goes in there. So once we have flow, we can look at sediment generation. Once we have a flow model that's working pretty well, we can look at runoff, and runoff is going to be associated with sediment generation. Pickering is the lower half of that. You can see again, most of the runoff is occurring in these watersheds up along Route 100. As we go down along the main stem and get to here, the main stem of the Pickering actually it's in pretty good shape here because most of the tributaries are coming out of relatively low runoff. Most of the water is coming out of relatively low runoff tribs with good base flow. And this, you go in there, this is where you're going to see there's nice trout holding in there. That's where the out-of-state plates will show up because people are coming in to fish. So it's kind of a backwards condition that most streams are good in the headwaters and get worse as they go down. In this case, the headwaters are getting hammered. But as this goes down through mostly conserved lands, we're seeing water quality improve, which is contrast. We can actually zoom in. We can actually get a higher resolution view of the runoff using the 1 meter UVM model that William Penn paid for. So we have a 1 meter resolution land cover data set, which is really cool. So all this flow, all of this runoff we're going to look at a picture at this site right here. All this runoff has to go someplace. And what's happening is we're seeing this all through the watersheds. The flow is essentially it brings heavy material down with it, sand, gravel, cobble, which deposits, and then the flow gets pushed into fresh sediments and erodes these banks. This is moving at something about 2 feet a year at this point. This is all of this is, if you got out there, it's rocks, it's clean gravel, it's sand, it's the stuff that drops out. So maybe a little silt on top of it, and vegetation is going to try and grow on it. This was dammed in 1890, so we know exactly when these sediments formed, and was breached in 1940. So that's actually a 3D model of that same stream bank. It's about 8 feet tall, and it's pretty crazy erosion site. Yeah, it was a crazy year last year too. Legacy sediments were behind another former mill dam over in French Creek. Sabrina is out there. That is really what it looks like. It's about a 10-foot bank of mud. It's eroding rapidly, and these trees get undercut. I'm actually out on one of these trees taking a picture back in. No shortage of old mill sites in the Pickering, but we also have, in between the mill sites, just as much sediment built up. Any kind of a old stone bridge would slow the water down. You have these huge, half-mile long or better, just huge sediment lenses. So this is where the mayfly comes in. Our problem is to identify the sources for these, but we also need to be able to measure the delivery of these. So this is where I'm just very happy to have 4 mayflies in there. A very cost-effective technology for collecting this kind of information. So, and the idea is to get the inputs to equal the outputs. And this is the route we're taking. We have 80 years worth of aerial imagery is sort of condensed into this. Stream was here in 1937, that's 2005. There's actually 1960s and 1950s, but I haven't started to work with those yet. Same mechanism. If you go out and look at this, this is just heavy sand and gravel that's getting deposited. There's enough storm power, water power to move it along, drops here, and that this is being forced, water is being forced into this fresh material. In this case, it's trying to find its other way around too. A little close up. We're actually going to look at this material here. It's kind of interesting. This is what that looks like. We're going to take a look at this. And up close, that's brick material. And this is all charcoal. This is fugitive material from the charcoal making operations upstream. So we can date these sediments.
Yeah.
Pardon?
It looks the same even in small areas. Small streams do exactly that same erosion pattern.
So these images, this is from 2008. Back to the same site in 2009. We'll just cut to the chase. This piece now, the red is 2008. The new erosion here is 2009. Pieces of this have moved. Pieces of this have moved. There's a bunch of different mechanisms that are delivering the sediment. They think this is a freeze-thaw phenomenon where you get splitting and then mass failure. This is almost definitely what's the word for it? But anyway, the force of the water across it is literally stripping material off. Shear forces. And lastly, so we're back in the Pickering. We're between the two main stem sensors. Again, the creek used to be here in 1937. It's just moving. And if you went out and got on this bridge and looked at this, again, you'd see you've got this tall, all fresh erosion. You've got a nice little beard of turf hanging down in there. So this is the material, that in aggregate across the entire watershed is what the mayfly sensor is seeing at the outlet. So I've got my work cut out for me. So. Eventually, it's not playing, David. Okay, that's supposed to be a video. This would actually be a daily sediment generation, something I did 5 years ago. And this is when we have a better handle on the sources, where the sediment's originating in the Pickering, we will be able to throw them back into the model. The cool thing is the model, it's an adding network. So all your inputs, where you put them in, then get taken into a much larger calculational process and would end up at your sensor, which in this case is the USGS station here. So SL113 is underneath there someplace. I'm really impressed with this hardware. There's the control box, it's there, but that sensor is down underneath of this someplace. So, and has survived 2 years worth of storms right now without a single problem. So.
That's surprising too, that probably tree trunks and everything else floating down.
Been lucky, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing.
So, question, when you said ag easement, ag affects the runoff. Any difference or any data between plowed and no-till? I mean, one would think no-till would reduce the runoff.
I don't have it, but there's tons of information on that, and that's one of the things that's happening. The Roundup and no-till route, you're seeing that more and more. Even with traditional farmers, they're coming around, so you see the fields that look like
That's got more cancer, right?
Well, that's Roundup, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, to Jim's point, riparian restoration is tremendously more important than no-till agriculture.
Right. Yeah. I'm somewhat familiar with all the work that Stroud's been doing on that. And there's huge benefits from riparian buffers in terms of all sorts of measurable in-stream parameters, the amount of nutrient that makes it through that shallow aquifer zone, et cetera. But
Was that a question or was that a statement?
Well, it was a little bit of both. I was asking Mike to confirm my statement.
Challenge. Probably.
if you can put a buffer between that ag and the creek, hands down,
Yes.
that's yes. A lot of the, I don't have it here, but a lot of the problems that we have, the runoff from the fields, I don't know how you would intercept them short of these beaver dam analogs because they're getting into gullies. Once they're down that gully, they leave. They're in long-term ephemeral stream features. So there's ephemeral streams draining, ephemeral streams draining these ag lands, and that's where I guess you need to put the riparian buffer is all the way up where this water is accumulating up in the ag section. Sort of what they're doing experimentally right there at Stroud. All that fascinating. Pardon?
With Rodale?
All that beautiful level spreaders and all the rest of that stuff.
Yeah, local spreaders. Yeah, we usually do 100 foot is what they're pushing for now, buffers. Yeah, so I'm going to say like this, third question, I think the buffer really depends on the actual width of the buffer itself. Yeah. And what's in the buffer. And people plant grass or a few shrubs and call it a buffer. But, I think if you're talking about 100-foot buffers that's well established with mature trees and, it's an understory and all, it's a lot different than a buffer that is, a little bit of grass between the stream and a farm field.
What's cool is we're going from that qualitative understanding to quantitative understanding. You can look directly at the tools Stroud's got and other tools and go ahead and put that buffer in there and actually predict the reductions. You can model those and come up with a projected reduction. So
if you look at the critical variable for erosion, and I have a chart on that, but I don't have it in my presentation today. One of the top two will be stream bed erosion, stream bank, and then the length of the channel, okay, and the slope of the terrain, and the percentage of ag land that you have in the watershed is another important variable. And there's probably, I think there's 5 or 6 that I use for the multivariable correlation to be able to classify the sediment loading in a particular watershed.
we have a shortage of funds to do this work. So that's really, the point of this is to, and what you're doing is trying to figure out where your money's going to be best spent. Riparian buffers, great. No-till, great. Cover crops, and being able to do simulations and do scenarios is, I think, where this is all going. But you still need hard data. You still need the wonderful mayfly sensors. Mm-hmm. Okay. Good question.
You probably have some historical data that look at the nutrient load.
Yes.
Has that shifted as the agricultural use and getting shifted out of erosion off the land versus streambank erosion? There was a paper that some guys did around down in Chesapeake where they were looking at primarily the nutrient load they've been talking about came out of streambank erosion, soil, ooze dissolved out of the soil and that came out of the stream bank. So I'm just questioning if you've seen that kind of trend. You might even be able to use, if there's a significant shift, you might even be able to use that to pinpoint locations that need more restoration than others.
Well, number one, we don't know if we're seeing more stream bank erosion now or less because the farmland's decreasing. The urban's coming up. What we really need to do is build a bunch of land cover data sets going backwards and then run the model and see what's happening. Phosphorus, we have 50 years worth of total phosphorus data. Dry weather sampling is actually coming down in watersheds. Nitrogen is pretty much staying level, but and these watersheds are actually pretty clean. So phosphorus is manageable at 50, 40, 30 parts per billion in these was. I used up more than my 5 minutes.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Stop recording.
Okay. Dave, can't you hit the hives and kill that blue thing? No, over there.
Are you starting to work with SWAT?
No, because it's too much work. I'm serious. I didn't want to get.
The guys are doing too much work.
Where did you?
That is the input files.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
We can talk about
Oh, there it is.
No, I'd like to. Yeah.
Okay, Ryan's back. Stop